Claire Monroe loved order. In the predictable rhythm of her life, she found comfort, a quiet haven in a noisy world. Her apartment was small but filled with warmth. Bookshelves lined with weathered classics, potted herbs in the windowsill, and the ever-present aroma of something baking in the oven. Claire was a professor of English literature at a college in Boston. Her days were spent surrounded by Shakespearean tragedy, Austenian irony, and the meditative grief of Dickinson. Her students adored her calm voice and structured classes, but what they didn't see was how deeply Claire clung to that structure. It was how she made sense of the chaos she feared. Her husband, Victor, was her opposite in almost every way. Where she studied metaphor and meaning, he dealt in code and robotics. He was a quiet, meticulous man who designed automation systems for a private tech firm. His mind worked in algorithms and models, but he loved the way Claire's mind danced in ambiguity. They'd been married for 8 years, solid, uneventful years that felt like a warm quilt slowly woven over time. Every Sunday, without fail, Victor drove to his parents' farmhouse in rural Vermont. It had become a quiet ritual between them. He would leave early in the morning, claiming he needed to help his aging father with home repairs and chores. Claire always packed him a basket of food, something warm and thoughtful. Meat pies, apricot jam, herbed bread wrapped in cloth. She never went with him, not because she wasn't invited, but because it was their unspoken arrangement. It gave him time with his family, and it gave her quiet hours alone to read and think. Victor would return at night, tired but seemingly content. He'd tell her about his mother's garden, his father's stubbornness, the state of the barn roof. Claire would listen patiently, laugh in the right places, ask about the weather. It felt like a ritual from another time. Simple, peaceful, good. But in recent months, something had shifted. Victor still kissed her goodbye in the morning, still brought her coffee and read poetry with her before bed, but there was something shadowed in his eyes, a distance. He stared out the window more than usual, distracted and quiet. He seemed lost in thoughts she wasn't part of. Claire had noticed, of course, but she didn't ask. She assumed it was stress. His company had taken on a complicated government contract, and Victor was the lead engineer. She tried to make things easier for him, packing extra snacks, playing his favorite Chopin pieces in the evening, brushing his hair gently while he read. If he was pulling away, she hoped she could pull him gently back. Then, on one particular Saturday, Claire woke up with a strange feeling, a kind of instinct. She sat up in bed and listened to the silence of their apartment, then went to the kitchen. The fridge was full. Jars of pickled beets she had made last week, leftover chicken soup, and a container of raspberry tarts. She stared at them, then made a decision she couldn't quite explain. She would go to the farmhouse herself, alone, without telling Victor. Not out of suspicion, but simply because she missed his parents and wanted to surprise them. It felt harmless. It felt right. She packed the food with quiet precision, folded everything into a cloth-lined basket, put on her favorite wool coat, and stepped out into the brisk New England air. She didn't know it then, but that morning would unravel everything she thought she knew. Claire loaded the last container of food into the basket and stood by the kitchen window, watching the sunlight stretch across the rooftops of Boston. Her hands were still, but her mind wasn't. For weeks now, she had felt something shifting beneath the surface of their life, small tremors in the solid foundation she and Victor had built together. He was still the same in many ways, thoughtful, gentle, even attentive. He brought her tea without asking. He left sticky notes on the bathroom mirror with little quotes from Rilke or Dickinson. He still warmed her hands when she forgot her gloves, but something was missing in his gaze. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't indifference. It was more subtle, like the warmth had been turned down just a few degrees. He had become quieter, not just in speech, but in spirit. His laugh, once so soft and warm, now seemed distant. When Claire asked how his Sunday visits went, he gave fewer details than he used to. Sometimes he paused for too long before answering. Once, she noticed him come home with a scratch on his forearm. He told her it was from helping repair the chicken coop. But there was no coop on the farm as far as she remembered. Claire had never been a jealous woman. Suspicion was foreign to her nature. She believed in kindness, in trust, in people choosing each other every day. but lately there were nights when Victor stood by the window long after she'd gone to bed, silhouetted in the dark, staring out into the city as if it whispered something only he could hear. She didn't want to admit it aloud, but the idea had started to form in her mind. What if he was hiding something? Not betrayal necessarily, but a part of his life that she had been carefully kept away from. Why had she never met a neighbor from his parents' village? Why had no one ever come to visit them in Boston? It was this quiet uncertainty, not a loud suspicion, that pushed Claire to act. That morning, as she buckled the basket into the passenger seat of their old Subaru, she told herself it was just a surprise, just kindness, just something small and good in a world that had started to feel unclear. The drive out of the city was familiar. She had taken it a few times early in their marriage, when they were still newlyweds and curious about every corner of each other's lives. The farther she drove, the more the city faded behind her, replaced by sleepy towns, weathered barns, and groves of fiery autumn trees. Claire rolled down the window slightly and let the cool air in. It smelled like pine and earth, like October. She turned on the classical station and let the music fill the car. Her heart felt oddly light, hopeful even. She imagined Victor's parents stepping onto the porch, surprised and delighted to see her. She pictured them praising the tarts, asking her about work, maybe hugging her a little tighter than usual. She had no way of knowing that just beyond the bend in that quiet country road, the truth she wasn't ready for was already waiting, with arms that didn't belong to her. Claire had always found something calming about long drives through the countryside. There was a rhythm to the road, the gentle sway of the car, the quiet between songs on the radio. As she left the highway behind and turned onto a winding rural road, she felt almost foolish for the strange anxiety that had lingered in her chest all week. Everything looked so peaceful. Miles of golden trees swaying in the autumn breeze, an occasional wooden fence trailing alongside a sleepy pasture. The sky was soft with late morning light. She had never driven to Victor's parents' house alone before, but the directions were etched in her memory. She had memorized the turns from listening to Victor describe them on quiet Sunday nights, often while she massaged the tension from his shoulders. "Just past the old red mailbox," he would say, then left at the fork with the wooden deer sign. Claire smiled, remembering. She turned at the wooden deer, and soon the trees began to thin. She passed a small creek with flat stones and a crooked footbridge. And then, there it was, the farmhouse. The house looked exactly as she remembered, pale blue siding with white-trimmed windows, a modest porch with a hanging fern, and a garden out front with a few stubborn marigolds still in bloom. There was a car parked near the side, not Victor's, but familiar enough to make her wonder. She pulled over and parked along the fence, turning off the engine. The basket of food sat beside her, still warm from the morning. Her heart beat a little faster now, but she brushed it off as nerves. She was about to surprise her in-laws after all. Claire stepped out of the car and adjusted her scarf. The air was crisp and carried the scent of leaves and smoke. She walked quietly toward the house, basket in hand, already imagining the delight on their faces. And then she saw them. On the porch, standing in the sunlight, was Victor. But he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, tall with dark hair pulled back loosely. In her arms, a young boy. The child couldn't have been older than 5. Claire's steps faltered. Her breath caught before she even realized what she was seeing. Victor leaned in and said something to the woman. She laughed. It wasn't a casual kind of laugh. It was soft, familiar, intimate. Then the boy wriggled out of the woman's arms and ran to Victor, calling out a word Claire couldn't hear. Victor crouched down and pulled the boy into his arms. He ruffled the child's hair with tenderness. Such ease, such warmth. The boy beamed. Victor kissed the top of his head. And Claire froze. She stood there, halfway behind the garden fence, the basket hanging limply from her arm. The sound around her faded. The wind, the birds, the distant rustle of trees. All that remained was the hollow thud of her heartbeat in her ears. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The image before her shattered something inside her so suddenly, so completely, that she felt weightless, like her body had become glass, ready to splinter. This wasn't just a moment of affection. This wasn't an innocent visit. This was a life, an entire life she had never known existed. And her husband was at the center of it. Claire's legs wouldn't move. She stood rooted behind the fence like a statue carved from disbelief. The basket of pastries, her quiet offering of love, grew heavy in her hand, forgotten. She blinked hard, hoping she had misread the moment, that perhaps this was some cousin visiting or an old friend from the village. But deep down, her body already knew. Her instincts had known for weeks. She watched Victor lift the child and rest him on his hip. The boy giggled and wrapped his arms around Victor's neck. Then gently, the woman placed her hand on Victor's arm, and Victor didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He smiled. Claire stumbled back a step. Her heel hit a rock and nearly twisted, but she caught herself before falling. The sudden movement caught no one's attention. They hadn't seen her. She was still hidden, a ghost hovering outside a world that didn't belong to her. Her breathing quickened. Her heart pounded so loud she thought the birds might scatter. She turned on her heel and walked briskly, almost blindly, back to the car, clutching the basket like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. She got in, slammed the door shut, and sat behind the wheel, hands trembling so violently she could barely insert the key. Her eyes stung, but the tears didn't fall yet. Her body was too shocked to cry. Her mind, too busy unraveling 8 years of marriage, was a tornado of disbelief. The car started. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The country road blurred past her, but her thoughts were sharp. Too sharp. Who was that woman? Whose child was that? How long had this been going on? Had he ever planned to tell her? Claire's grip on the steering wheel tightened. A thought stabbed through her chest so painfully it made her gasp. Had Victor been living a double life all this time? She pulled over suddenly, skidding a little on the gravel shoulder. The basket tipped over. A glass jar of jam shattered on the floor mat, its contents spreading like blood. She leaned forward, burying her face in her hands, and finally, she cried. It wasn't just crying. It was a gut-wrenching, wordless sob that came from a place she didn't know existed inside her. The kind that doesn't ask for comfort. The kind that comes when something permanent has broken. She stayed like that for what felt like hours. When the tears slowed, all that remained was a hollow ache. She stared at the dashboard, eyes swollen, throat raw. A single word circled her mind like a dark mantra. Why? Victor, her quiet, reliable husband. The man who read her poetry. The man who made her feel safe. How could he hide something so enormous? How could he lie every Sunday, come home smelling like hay and wood smoke, and still kiss her forehead like nothing had changed? A new feeling began to take root. Not just grief, not confusion. Something deeper, hotter, more dangerous. Rage. Not the kind that explodes, the kind that simmers, that waits. Claire sat back in her seat and stared through the windshield at nothing. She couldn't unsee what she'd seen, couldn't undo what had just happened. But she wasn't ready to confront Victor. Not yet. Not until she understood what she had witnessed. Not until she had answers. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat. Her voice was hoarse as she whispered, "You don't get to decide what I know." And with that, Claire made a decision. She would return, not as a wife demanding explanations, but as a woman seeking the truth. 3 days passed. Claire didn't tell Victor what she had seen. She didn't ask about Sunday's visit. She didn't cry in front of him. Instead, she moved through the apartment like a ghost, polite, restrained, functioning. But inside, her mind replayed the porch scene again and again, each time adding new, unbearable details. The way he touched the boy's hair, the curve of the woman's smile, the ease, the familiarity, a rhythm that had been practiced over time. Claire knew she couldn't live in that silence. She had to know more. So, on the 4th morning, she packed a tote bag, dressed in neutral colors, and drove back to the village. But this time, she came not as Victor's wife. She came as someone else. She parked further from the house, just off the dirt road near a crumbling stone wall. She got out, fixed her scarf, and rehearsed her story. She was a graduate student doing research on rural architecture for a side project. She'd heard from a local librarian that an old colonial farmhouse near the woods had original stonework. It was flimsy, but it gave her an entry. As Claire approached the gate, the woman from before stepped onto the porch. She looked surprised, but not alarmed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy braid, and she wore a faded green sweater with patches on the elbows. She looked ordinary, tired, and kind. Claire stopped a few feet from the gate. "Hi. I I was told you have a beautiful old farmhouse. I'm sort of obsessed with historical homes." The woman narrowed her eyes slightly, but then offered a tentative smile. "It's nothing special, but sure. I'm Evelyn." Claire hesitated. "Ari," she said, inventing a name on the spot. "Nice to meet you." Evelyn opened the gate. "You can come in. It's not much, but I just made some tea if you'd like." Claire followed her onto the porch and into the house. It was modest, warm, worn furniture, a bookshelf lined with children's books. The scent of bread and baby powder lingered in the air. In the corner of the room, the little boy sat on the floor playing with wooden blocks. Claire's chest tightened. "That's Sam," Evelyn said gently. "He's 5. Sam looked up and gave Claire a small, curious smile. She smiled back, then quickly looked away, afraid she might shatter. They sat at a small kitchen table. Evelyn poured tea into chipped mugs. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she reached for hers. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. Evelyn shrugged. "About 5 years. Moved back after, well, things got complicated in the city." Claire nodded, then set down her mug. She couldn't hold it in anymore. "I saw you, on Sunday, with Victor." Evelyn froze. Her face didn't twist in guilt. Just stillness. A long, thoughtful stillness. "You're his wife," she said softly. Claire nodded. "I figured he never told you," Evelyn added. "No," Claire said. "He didn't." There was a silence, thick and sharp, broken only by the ticking clock and Sam humming to himself on the floor. "I loved him once," Evelyn said, eyes fixed on her tea. "Years ago, before he met you. I got pregnant and he was shocked. We had already ended things. He was starting his new life with you." Claire swallowed hard. "So why this?" she whispered. "Because he couldn't walk away," Evelyn replied. "Not from his son. Victor comes every week, not as a lover, not as a husband, just a father. He fixes leaky pipes, reads bedtime stories, teaches Sam how to ride a bike. But at night, he goes home to you." Claire blinked, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe it. And somehow, deep inside, she did. "You're not afraid I'll take him away?" Evelyn looked her in the eye. "If you're the one he truly loves, I don't need to hold him here. I just want Sam to have his father." Claire didn't speak. Her throat burned. She looked down at Sam, still humming to himself, unaware of the storm he had been born into. She wasn't sure what she felt. Pity, rage, awe, heartbreak. But for the first time, she didn't feel blind. She saw the truth, and it hurt. Claire sat in the car for nearly an hour before driving home. The village disappeared behind her like a fading painting, but the words Evelyn had spoken echoed in her head, louder than the engine, louder than the music she didn't bother turning on. Not as a lover, just a father. It was supposed to be comforting. It wasn't. The betrayal wasn't in the act. It was in the silence. In the years he'd looked her in the eye and kept this part of his life buried behind Sunday drives and sleepy smiles. What else had he chosen not to tell her? By the time Claire stepped back into their apartment, the evening light had dimmed to gold. The smell of roasted garlic lingered in the air. Victor sat on the couch, a half-read book in his lap. He looked up when she entered, relief flashing across his face, followed by worry. "Claire," he said, rising to his feet. "I've been calling you. Where were you?" Claire didn't answer right away. She took off her coat, hung it carefully by the door, and turned to face him. "I was in Vermont," she said. Victor's breath hitched. "I saw Evelyn. I saw Sam." He didn't speak. His hands slowly lowered to his sides, and the book in his grip slipped and hit the floor with a soft thud. The silence that followed was brutal. "How long?" Claire asked. Victor's lips parted, then closed again. His eyes, usually so clear and rational, were wide and pleading. "Since the beginning," he whispered. "Before you." It was brief. I didn't know she was pregnant. Not until after we married. Claire nodded. "And you never thought to tell me?" "I was afraid." His voice cracked. "I didn't want to lose you. And when I met Sam for the first time, I just couldn't walk away." She stepped closer, but her tone stayed even. "So you chose to live two lives instead. To lie to me for 5 years." "I didn't lie," he said quickly. I omitted. Claire raised a hand. "Don't finish that sentence. It's the same thing." Victor looked down. "I know." He sank onto the couch, his shoulders folding in on themselves. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I didn't want you to see me differently. And I couldn't abandon Sam. He's innocent in all this." Claire sat down across from him, her voice quieter now. "And what about me? Am I not innocent too?" Victor looked up, pain etched across his face. "You are. You always were." "Then why didn't I get to choose?" she asked, and for a moment her voice broke. "You took that from me, Victor. The chance to know the truth and decide what I could live with." He looked at her helplessly. "I thought I was protecting you." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You were protecting yourself." The room fell into silence again, but this time it was the silence of honesty. Raw and terrifying. Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I love you, Claire. I never stopped." She didn't answer. She didn't know yet if that mattered. The next morning, Claire left. She didn't slam the door. She didn't shout. She simply packed a small bag, left a note on the kitchen table, and walked out into the cold Boston air. Victor didn't try to stop her. He knew better than to offer words when hers had already run out. Claire didn't go far. Just a couple of hours north, to a cottage once owned by her aunt. A quiet place tucked between pine trees, a lake beyond the back porch. She hadn't been there in years, not since before her wedding. The key still worked. The silence still welcomed her like an old friend. She spent the first day walking aimlessly through the woods, boots crunching through brittle leaves. Her mind swirled with too many questions and not enough answers. At night, wrapped in a blanket by the fireplace, she watched the logs crackle and remembered how Victor used to warm her fingers when they got too cold. It hurt to think about it now. She tried to write it all down, to make sense of the betrayal, of the quiet years built on omission, but the words didn't come. Instead, she read old books, Russian poetry, Virginia Woolf, anything that would drown out the sound of her own thoughts. But nothing worked for long. On the third evening, as the sun bled into the lake, Claire stood on the porch with a mug of tea and asked herself the question she had been avoiding. Was it unforgivable? Victor hadn't cheated on her in the way people whisper about at work or cry about in coffee shops day. He hadn't betrayed her body. He'd betrayed her right to truth, to choice, to partnership. He'd carved out a piece of his life and said, "This part you don't get to see." And yet, she had seen the boy's face. Sam. She had seen how he looked at Victor, with absolute, unshakable love. And she had heard Evelyn's voice when she said, "I don't want to keep him. I just want my son to have a father." Claire wasn't sure what surprised her more, how much it still hurt, or how part of her no longer wanted to run. Because beneath the pain, there was something else. A soft, reluctant thread of understanding. Victor had made a terrible choice, but he had also chosen to stay in the life they built. Every day. Every year. Was that enough? She didn't know. But she knew she couldn't answer that question here, alone, forever. She needed to go home. Not to forgive, not yet, but to see if something could still be salvaged. If the cracks now exposed to light could be sealed not with illusion, but with truth. She poured the rest of her tea into the grass, and for the first time in days, she felt ready to speak again. Claire returned to Boston just after sunrise. The city hadn't changed, but she had. She carried no suitcase this time, only a small bag of books and a quiet resolve. Her chest still ached when she thought of Evelyn, of Sam, of everything Victor had hidden, But the ache no longer ruled her. It simply existed. When she opened the door to their apartment, Victor was already awake. He stood in the kitchen, barefoot, holding a mug with both hands like it might steady him. When he saw her, he froze. Claire stepped inside without speaking. She took off her coat and hung it gently. She walked past him, sat down at the table, and waited. Victor set down his mug and joined her. He didn't ask where she had been. He didn't plead or apologize again. He just looked at her like a man who expected nothing. And still hoped. Claire met his eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, she spoke. "I'm not leaving." Victor's breath caught. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just let the words land like sunlight after a storm. "But I haven't forgiven you," she continued. "Not yet." He nodded slowly. "And I don't know if I ever fully will." "I understand," he said, voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at her hands. "What I saw broke something in me. Not just because of what you did, but because you decided I didn't need to know. You made me live in a life that wasn't fully real." "I know," he said. "I made a choice. And it was wrong." Claire took a deep breath. "So now I'm making mine." She stood, walked to the counter, and pulled a second basket from her bag. Inside were pastries she had baked the night before at the cottage. Still warm, still soft. "I want to meet him properly," she said. "Sam." Victor blinked. You want to go back?" Claire nodded. "Not because I want to play house. Not because I've accepted everything, but because he's a child. He's innocent. And if I'm going to stay, really stay, I can't pretend he doesn't exist." Victor covered his face with his hands. A sound escaped him. Not a sob, not relief, but something between. The kind of sound someone makes when they've been holding their breath for years. "Are you sure?" he asked. "No," Claire said honestly, "but I want to be." The next morning, they drove together. Victor held the steering wheel with both hands, glancing at her now and then as if still unsure she was real. Claire sat with the basket in her lap, watching the road, the trees, the same wooden deer sign where she once turned alone. When they arrived, Evelyn opened the door with the same weary expression, but it softened when she saw Claire. "I hoped you would come," she said simply. Claire stepped forward. "I brought something for Sam." The boy peeked out from behind her legs. His eyes were bright, curious, wide open to possibility. Claire knelt down, pulled a small cinnamon roll from the basket, and held it out. "Hi, Sam," she said gently. "I'm Claire." He took it, shy but brave, and offered a crumb of a smile. Claire smiled back. In that moment, she knew she wasn't erasing anything. Not pretending, not forgetting, but choosing to build something new. Brick by careful brick. Not perfect, but real.